Playing Hollow Knight for the first time was such an amazing experience. The game was difficult and unforgiving at times, and each new boss for me was a new learning experience. There was almost never a time that I was entirely sure what I was doing or if my strategy to win would work. It was the perfect mix of difficulty with enjoyment. I enjoyed the game so much, in fact, that I find myself replaying it all the time. I can honestly say I'm still not very great at it, but I do know what to expect and I have a pretty good idea of what to do and how to tackle each situation now. That's when I started looking into new ways to play the game. I started out with some speedrunning and I got fairly decent at it, but the tricks and skips only made me wonder what else could be done to take this amazing game and give it a new challenge. There are a whole slew of meme categories out there, but one that I have not personally seen and couldn't find any information on was whether or not you could beat all of the bosses in the game in alphabetical order. So I have taken it upon myself to answer that very question. Now, of course, I had to lay a few ground rules to even give this challenge a chance. First of all, I will not be including the Hollow Knight or Radiance. You could technically beat the Hollow Knight and then move on to whatever's next on the list and come back and refight him and then fight Radiance, but that seemed convoluted and a bit silly. I'm also not going to be including DLC bosses, so fights like Sly, the Hive Knight, and Grey Prince Zote will not be present. Dream bosses are also off the table, so no White Defender, Lost Kin, or Soultire. The last thing is that to be considered for the list, the boss's name must appear on screen when we first fight it. This excludes fights like Massive Mosh Charger, Oblobbles, and Soul Warrior. With those rules in mind, I have determined that there are 17 bosses that need to be beaten. Just because I took out a lot of bosses with the rules does not mean that this is going to be easy, which is what I was thinking when I first started to route this. Our very first boss that we need to fight is Broken Vessel. In case you are unfamiliar with Hollow Knight, the game is not entirely linear, but you are intended to make your way through the first area and fight the False Knight, who will give us access to the Vengeful Spirit, which is going to be crucial for us in this run. False Knight, however, starts with an F, so it looks like this is where the run ends. I honestly thought we would get a little bit further than this. Well, thanks for watching. Alright, so obviously that isn't actually where things end. It turns out that the devs added this little breakable wall to the left of the fight so we can escape and deal with him later. Once we have gotten a hold of our new spell, we must be aware that the game expects us to have specific abilities to make progress throughout. The first major movement upgrade you're supposed to get is the Mothwing Cloak, which allows you to dash a short distance ahead of you. Unfortunately, the game decided that this ability would be locked behind the Hornet fight, so we will have to make do without it for a while. The next big ability is the Mantis Claw, which will allow us to wall jump on most walls to help us reach higher ledges. The game really wants you to have the dash before you even attempt to get the claw though, so there's this huge gap at the Queen Station separating the player from the area where you would search for the claw. Luckily for us, we were able to get our hands on the Vengeful Spirit spell, because with it, we can do a very tricky move usually known as a fireball skip, to just barely make it across, which of course I did on my first try. The rest of the area goes by as normal, but then we reach our next roadblock. The entrance to Mantis Village has a similar problem, where there is a gap that the game expects you to dash across. Only this time, due to the ledge being slightly more elevated, our fireball skip isn't going to work. Another common trick to use is a shade skip, but if we die at the entrance of Mantis Village, our shade spawns on the other side of the obstacle we are trying to overcome, with no way to lure it over to you. There is, however, another entrance to the village that you are expected to use the Mantis Claw we are so desperately trying to retrieve to get through. It's a giant wall with no obvious way to climb it, but this is where our shade skip will come into play. We have to make sure to rest at the bench outside of the Mantis Village and make our way up to the room with the wall, which is also a bit tricky, as you need to pogo off some enemies in order to make it back up. Once in the room, we will have to die, which this Sporg is happy to help us with. Then, upon respawning, we have to make our way back up to that room again and do an extremely difficult shade pogo to gain access to the top of the wall. Once we have done that, we can head into the Mantis village. There is one more small thing stopping us from getting the claw, however. We need to hit the switch in the bottom left of the room to open the door and then head back up through it and grab our prize. Only the game still expects you to have the dash at this point, so you will have to carefully pogo off the enemies to gain the height needed to reach the ledge. If you mess up and kill all of the enemies somehow, which obviously didn't happen to me, then you will have to redo the whole sequence, starting with the shade skip. But assuming you are competent, then you can finally get a hold of the Mantis Claw. This is a great tool to help us in getting to new places, but we still haven't even gotten to our first boss, so we should try to do that. The broken vessel is in the ancient basin all the way near the bottom of the map. Usually I would go through the City of Tears and make my way down through the royal waterways to get access to the ancient basin, but we cannot enter the city the normal way because we do not have the city crest that you get from killing the false knight. In the any % speedrun, we have a different way of getting to the city, but it involves killing the Gruz Mother, which is off limits as well for us at this point. All is not lost though, as there is another way which requires us to go into Deep Nest. With our new wall jump ability, we can make our way back through the fungal wastes and drop down into Deep Nest. From here, we have to go all the way down to the bottom where the hot spring is. Our entrance to the basin will be to the right of here, via the tram station. But first, we have to make our way through more of Deep Nest in order to get the tram pass. It's not too difficult to do, but it does seem impossible to leave the room in which you get the pass without having the dash. The good news is that we can just quit to the menu, and then assuming you sat at the bench near the hot spring, we will just respawn right there when we load back into the game with the pass in hand. Now we finally have access to the ancient basin, and our first... Oh yeah, so there is this huge room full of spikes and what looks like no way to get past them. The game wants you to have the crystal heart here, which makes this room very simple. And while I'm convinced that you can get through this area using a series of pogos off of some spikes and your shade near the end, I opted to listen to the game and made my way back up to attempt the crystal peaks. I stopped in the City of Tears to collect some Geo and some stag stations first, and then I realized I would need the Desolate Dive spell or the Lumafly lantern in order to enter Crystal Peaks. In order to get Desolate Dive, we would have to defeat the Soul Master, which, last I checked, yeah, we can't do that yet. So instead, we have to go find Sly in order to open the shop. This is easy enough as we just have to climb up from the King's Station and take the elevator. A nice swim through the blue lake and we have arrived. So now we just need to make sure we have enough Geo to buy the lantern and then off to Crystal Peaks. It was at this point that I remembered that I am awful at this game, so I made my way throughout the game collecting some power-ups. I grinded Geo to buy mask shards and vessel fragments, as well as picking up what I could from around the map. I also bought the first nail upgrade. None of this is particularly necessary, but I need all the help I can get. There is nothing too noteworthy about the peaks as a whole until we actually make it to the room with the crystal heart in it. You are definitely supposed to have the Mothwing cloak here to make some of these gaps, but with a well-timed fireball skip and some very precise platforming, we can just make it to our next ability. One last thing before heading back down to finally face our first boss is that I grabbed the pale ore from the peaks and bought the second nail upgrade. Again, this isn't needed, but it will help. Now it's actually time to go face our first boss. This guy is no pushover, but I'm the last person you should come to for strategy advice.
That's it? No.
Once we beat him, as an added bonus, we gain access to the Monarch Wings, which is our double jump. This helps tremendously, but it is not smooth sailing just yet. Our next boss is the Brooding Moloch, and honestly you could beat this boss first if you wanted to, so there isn't much to say about it. The real problem is the boss after that. In order to fight the... you have to unlock the door that blocks access to him by using the love key. The love key, however, is located in the Queen's Garden. Normally, you would want to grab Isma's tear to allow you to swim in the acid to make your way there. But Dung Defender is guarding that, and even though he is coming up soon, we can't quite do that yet. Instead, what we need to do is a very difficult trick known as an acid skip. There are a few different spots where this trick is possible, but this particular one is extremely hard to pull off. With a little effort though, we can make it through and on towards the love key, which requires us to do yet another very hard acid skip. Both are possible though, and with a little bit of luck, I managed to get the key. From what I understand, it is also possible to do a different, possibly even harder acid skip in order to get Isma's tear early, but I know nothing about that, so I took the double acid skip route. Now with the key in hand, we can make our way all the way to the corner and defeat him. Another boss down, and it is finally starting to look like there won't be much standing in our way from here on out. Next, we have to go take out the Crystal Guardian, which has nothing special about it. Then we can make our way down to the Dung Defender and take care of him, and rewarding ourselves with Isma's tear afterwards. After grabbing the tear, we head right back to the peaks and beat the Enraged Guardian. Now we can finally take out that pesky false knight and get our city crest. We don't really need it at this point, but it feels good to finally be on track. Well, almost anyways. We only really have 2 more abilities to get, which are the Mothwing Cloak from Hornet and... oh no, the Desolate Dive. Of all the things that I considered throughout this whole run, I overlooked a small detail, which has now become a huge problem. If we want to defeat Flukmarm, we absolutely have to have the Desolate Dive. The area in which you fight Flukmarm cannot be accessed in any other way. The issue with this is that the dive ability is the reward for defeating the Soul Master. I have looked high and low for a solution to this problem, but I have come up with nothing. Unless there is someone out there that knows a way that I can get through the floor, then I am sad to say that this is where the run ends. It's even more tragic because it looks like everything past Flukmarm is pretty straightforward. God Tamer would be next, and aside from doing all the 3 Colosseums without the dash, it's far from impossible. Obviously Gruzmother doesn't put up much of a fight, and then it's on to Hornet to finally get the Mothwing Cloak. Technically Hornet 2 or Hornet Sentinel's name doesn't show up when the fight begins, but getting the Shade Cloak is going to be pretty helpful, so we would want to go and do that. We beat her and make our way into the Abyss to already replace the cloak we just got, and then it's off to the Mantis Lords. Quick work of them sees us moving on to Nosk, then Soulmaster, then Traitor Lord, Umu, and finally the Watcher Knights. And that is where the run would end. We were so close to beating all the enemies in alphabetical order, but one flimsy floor prevented us from tasting sweet victory. Even though this run ended in failure, it was still a lot of fun, and I urge you to go and try it for yourself. Flukmarm is in no way a roadblock in itself, so you could just skip it without consequence. Some of the bosses I left out could also definitely be added into this run, but I had to make some consistent rules for the sake of my sanity. The main issues were fights like Soul Warrior, False Champion, and Oro and Gato, among a few others. The tricks we used to get past the early hurdles were very challenging, but felt so rewarding to pull off. Let me know how you think I did in the comments down below, and if you think there is anything I missed, or any challenges you would like me to attempt next. And if you are feeling really generous, please consider giving a like. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.